Welcome to the next episode of the Austin Bar Association's Council of Firsts. I'm your host, Amanda Arriaga, First Latina Bar President. Today we talk to former Congressman Pete Gallego. Congressman Gallego is a graduate of Sul Ross State University and the University of Texas School of Law. He was elected to the Texas House only a few years after graduating from UT Law and remained there until 2012. He was the first Latino from his district to be elected from the state legislature and the first freshman and ethnic minority to be elected to chair of the House Democratic Caucus. In 2012, he became the first person from rural far west Texas to ever serve in Congress. He also gave back to his alma mater and served as president of Sul Ross State University from 2020 to 2022. Congressman Gallego is a true servant leader, and I'm excited to have him here with me today. Please welcome Pete Gallego. Thank you for being here.
Gracias.
I'm
It's
so
my pleasure to be
excited
here.
to talk to you.
Well, thank you.
And I want to start at the beginning. Why did you want to be a lawyer?
I wanted to be a lawyer because I wanted to, there was two things, right? I wanted to make sure that people were treated well and respectfully. I obviously grew up in a different time and a different era, and West Texas was not entirely friendly to Latinos, and people would say, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that, and I didn't believe it. So I wanted some education, right, to teach me whether. So it was not only about me learning what I could and couldn't do, but it was about helping other people learn what they could and couldn't do as well.
And most lawyers spend quite a bit of time before they run for office. Most lawyers I know actually would rather be a judge than be in the state legislature, but you decided that you wanted to be in the legislature as soon as you could. Tell us why.
One of my many jobs growing up in Alpine, I worked as a DJ in a radio station, the radio station in Alpine. And the owner of the radio station had been in the legislature from Alpine, one of the only other people from Alpine to serve in the legislature. It was a contemporary of Bob Bullock's. They were close friends. And I would hear all the stories, and I would, how essentially 5 people run the legislature, and wouldn't it be cool to be one of those 5 people? And so it started percolating. And my dad had been on the school board, was the first Latino. In those days, Latino, the word didn't exist. We were all Mexican. So he was the first one on the school board and kind of led the fight for integration of the school district in Alpine. And so I had kind of grown up around that. And then with those stories that I would hear, about the legislature and what was going on and how they were doing it, just made me want to be a part of it.
So something sort of amazing happened, I think, is you started in the legislature and immediately got elected to be the chair of the Democratic Caucus. How did that happen as a freshman? Who did you convince to do that?
It was being in the right place at the right time. It had never happened before. It's never happened since. But, I got to the legislature at a time when, nobody thought I was going to win, right? I mean, even my wife afterwards, when we talked about it, and she said, this politics is getting a little heavy, and I said, well, you knew, we got married 2 weeks after I got elected. So it's not like she didn't know that I like politics, but that's what she said. Yeah, but I never expected you to win, So I went to the legislature and I met a lot of people, and I was upfront and direct and saying, look, my family has never done anything like this. I really don't know anybody else who's done anything like this. And so I'm at a loss for how to do this. Can you help me? Can you teach me? Can you mentor me? And I asked that really of a lot of the big committee chairs, who were extremely kind and extremely gracious, and somewhat surprised because I think because I was the first Latino from that part of it was 2/3 of the Texas border with Mexico, but they'd never had, it had always been essentially an Anglo rancher that represented that part of the world. And so, I think people thought I was, I wore a bandana and I was going to burn the Capitol down my first term. I think that's kind of what people were ready for. And it wasn't my personality, right? And so they actually took me under their wing and they taught me things. And at that point, Ann Richards was governor. She needed a legislative affairs person. The person who was the Democratic caucus chair became her legislative affairs person. So there was a vacancy. And everybody said, there's no better way to learn than to learn by doing. And this will get you in on all the big things. It'll get, you'll be a chair and you'll be able to go to all the big stuff and we'll help you. So all of a sudden I turned around and wow, I was chairman of the Democratic caucus.
And you served in the legislature for 20 years.
22.
What are you most proud to have accomplished in this 22 years?
I'm proud of the relationship building that we were able to get things done and people uh, could argue against each other all day long and buy each other a beer. That was the environment that we wanted to build. On a personal level, I mean, I have a lot of things that, I see things happen today, or I read stories and I think of things that I did when I see that a crime victim made a statement in a criminal case. That was a bill that I carried, right? When I read about a domestic violence case, it's a choking case. That was a bill that I carried. Crime Victims Bill of Rights, enabling legislation I did. And, frankly, when I'm driving back and forth between Austin and Alpine and I get to go 80 on I-10, that was the bill that I did, right? I mean, all of those kinds of things. So there's really a lot. I mean, recently I've been seeing insurance coverage stuff about kids who are young and need prosthetic devices because when I was in the legislature, family came to me and, their little kid had needed a prosthetic device very young, but now they were 15 and 16 and the technology had changed and the insurance company wanted them to, even though they were 15 and 16, they wanted them to use their the same arm that they had been using from when they were 2 or 3 years old, which really wasn't going to work, right? So it was one of the only insurance band-aids that the legislature passed, and it took me a couple of sessions to do that. But now kids in Texas have coverage for prosthetic devices. I think of those kinds of things that really make a difference in people's lives, and that to me what being in the legislature was all about.
So, as we're recording, the Texas legislative session just began this week.
Yesterday.
Do you have any advice for the current legislators or their staff?
Oh, I think that there's a lot to be said for um, prioritizing the individual districts and the people that you represent over the party that you represent. I wasn't that much, even though I was, believe it or not. I mean, I know I was theoretically the leader of the Democratic Party but we weren't that hung up on parties. There were Democratic committee chairs, there were Republican committee chairs. The Democratic caucus's bylaws for years had said that the Democratic caucus's nominee was going to be the person that everybody voted for speaker. Well, that never happened. And it never happened because you just need to get to 76 and however you get. I mean, one of the interesting things to me, I learned a lesson. Actually, I mean, I learned a lot of them, but one of the things that I learned was that everybody's vote counted just as much as mine did, right? Everybody got there the same way that I did. They were all elected. And so on the floor of the House, my vote wasn't any more important than anybody else's vote. It was just one. I needed 76, and I didn't care which 76 they were. Today's 76 were different from yesterday's 76. And they were going to be different from tomorrow's 76. It didn't matter. Right now, I think there's too much focus on which 76. You've got to have the right 76 voting for you. And it's not very practical. And I don't think it serves the interests of Texas well.
Well, and you also had to work with your other chamber, with the Senate, in order to get anything passed. What was your experience like working with the other chamber?
I worked with several lieutenant governors. I had a great relationship, albeit it was a hardcore one. Governor Bullock was a lot dependent on the mood that he was in and how he was feeling that particular day. But he had a lot of respect for me. So even though he was screaming and yelling and calling me names, I knew that at the end of the day, we were okay. I worked with several other lieutenant governors. I mean, it's built in, there's supposed to be a healthy rivalry, right? And they may not like each other much. I don't think that Governor Perry and Speaker Laney, for example, really cared much for each other as presiding officers, but that was put aside so that the work got done. And nowadays, I mean, you get in each other's business. I mean, the House did what the House was going to do. That was the House's domain. The Senate did what the Senate was going to do. That was the Senate's domain. The House would never have thought of telling the Senate what to do, and the Senate would never have thought to try to tell the House what to do. And now everybody's playing in everybody else's sandbox. They're all getting in everybody else's business, and it just, again, I told somebody the other day, look, I've met a lot of Texans in my life. I mean, I've been a lot of places, met a lot of people. Not a single person has ever told me that they like and respect the way that the Congress of the United States does business. And yet that's exactly what Texas is going to go do, right? Even though Texans don't like Congress, we're somehow, right now, it appears that we want our legislature to be like Congress, which it's not something that, it doesn't harmonize well in my mind.
Well, and I always advocate for everyone, specifically lawyers, to pay attention to what is happening at the state capitol, because I think sometimes we forget, and now a law is in motion and you're angry about it, and you want to put on social media that you're angry about it. Well, run for state rep, run for state senator, donate to a state rep or senator, but just shouting after doesn't seem as helpful as being part of the process when you still have a chance to impact it.
Oh, I don't think yelling and screaming about anything does a lot of good. There's a certain time when you can make a difference, and I think you have to hit that time. And part of that really is the involvement in campaigns, or either through donating or through, frankly, even through participating, because you see a lot of people don't vote. I mean, heck, you look at state bar elections and what percentage of lawyers participate in state bar elections. It's not a very big percentage. But I always thought that if you don't participate, you don't have a right to complain. In my mind, right? I mean, I can tell you a true story about a friend of mine who was a county commissioner, and he was actually the youngest county commissioner in Texas at the time, and he decided he was going to make people participate in elections, and so. County commissioners do roads and bridges and potholes and those kinds of things. And especially in the rural counties, it's a big deal. So you called his house and you would say, hey, there's a pothole in front of my driveway. Can you get somebody to come by and fix the pothole? And he'd wait, you'd get silence on the line, and then you'd hear papers shuffling, and then he'd get back on the line and he'd say, you know what? You didn't vote in the last election. Don't call me again. All right. And it upped the rate of participation in those races, right? Because people realized that there was a tie between, this person that got elected and whether things were going to get done. The interesting thing about that story is that in the next election cycle, that county commissioner was in a tough race. And they told him what they would tell all of us who were running for office. People would tell you, you're going to be fine. You've done a great job. Everybody likes you. You're going to win. Don't worry about it, man. Just, you're going to be okay. So in small towns, I mean, the polls close at 7, and by 7:10, 7:15, they've announced the results, right? So he had a cousin of his that he had talked to, and he told the cousin, look, this race, it's going to be really close. It's going to come in really close. I really need to make sure that everybody in the family, everybody votes. And the cousin said, sure, man, but I don't see why you're worried, because everybody likes you. You're going to be fine. You've done a great job. You're going to win. Right? So at the end of early voting, he'd noticed his cousin hadn't voted, but, there's still election day. He calls his cousin, and cousin says, no worries, I'll remember to vote. So election day comes along. It's 5:00. You know who's voted, and his cousin wasn't one of them. So he calls his cousin and he says, hey, I really need you to get over here to come and vote. And the cousin said, "Hey, man, I'm working cattle out here on this ranch, and the rancher's not gonna let me just like leave the cattle to go vote. So, but hey, man, you don't need me. You're gonna win. You're gonna be fine. Everybody likes you. You're gonna be great, man." And the commissioner said, "What are you talking about? I told you this was gonna come in close. You said you were gonna come for me." So they had a fairly hardcore conversation. Well, the cousin doesn't vote, and that night, election results come out. And my friend, who was the youngest county commissioner in Texas, is no longer going to be a county commissioner. He lost his race by one vote. And I don't know if he and his cousin ever made up, but yeah, that was the one. It would have forced her off. It would have at least given him another shot.
Well, he might have also lost because he wouldn't fill in the potholes. So just, fussing at your constituents was probably not helpful.
I don't know that it was or it wasn't, because I will tell you that there's got to be at some point you've got to make the. I get the impression that a lot of people vote right now, but they vote on the basis of entertainment value, right? I mean, it's not necessarily a substantive philosophical vote. It's not necessarily that they agree or disagree. They're just, they want to see the drama, and so I think if you can draw the connection between, okay, this is what this candidate believes, and this is what's going to happen. This is what this candidate believes, and you decide whichever way you believe, then vote for the candidate that, I was always taught that politics was local, so that if it was something that was important to you locally, that was the most important thing. But right now, politics isn't local, right? Everything, I mean, the dog catcher in Alpine, if he was elected, he'd have to be, worried about what was going on in DC, because that's what his race would be about. And it's just crazy that we're at that point.
Well, and speaking of DC, you left the Texas House to be a United States congressman. Why did you make that choice, knowing how different those two groups operate?
I had stayed in the legislature for 22 years because I thought I was going to be speaker, and I came very close. 17 people in one district in Dallas County. The member who won that race, if that member had lost, we would have come in at 75 Republicans and 75 Democrats. And I had enough commitments on the Republican side to help me be speaker. But then, the next time around, it was the Obama midterm, and we slid back. I don't know, we lost 20 something votes in the House. So it was clear to me that God did not intend for me to be speaker. So I needed to find something else. I really enjoyed policy. I still don't really care for politics, but I really like policy. And so I figured I would try my hand at Washington, D.C. Enjoyed it, but it was extremely different. It was a thing where, even when they do dinners and lunches and stuff, they put the Democrats in one room and they put the Republicans in the other. I mean, from orientation on, they have a day where the Republicans can fly flags over the Capitol, and those are Republican flags, and a day where the Democrats get to fly flags over the Capitol, and those are the Democratic flags, and you can't mix the Democratic flags with the Republican flags, even though they're all U.S. flags, right? I mean, it's just a crazy way to do business. But, Texas was already in the process of changing. And so I caught it essentially at the wrong time. And, the people in the leadership at the time in Texas in the legislature, it was a redistricting session, and people said, why didn't you say anything that you wanted to run for Congress? We would have, we would have helped you. We would have liked you. We like you, but we would have done something different. But in that district, it's trending Republican, so you're going to win it once, and then you're not going to win it anymore. And that's exactly what happened. I took my chances. I knew that, and you know what? It's okay. I mean, that's just how the system works. It was a fair fight.
And what did you get to work on in Congress that you're very proud of?
I was in armed services, and I did a lot of veteran stuff, and I did a lot of stuff with people in uniform. I wasn't one who traveled to a lot of places because the only place that I traveled regularly was to Afghanistan. I spent a lot of time and I would go look for the Texas folks, and then I'd come home and meet with their parents, especially if they were from the district, and report that they were okay and they were doing good, and carry stuff back and forth and do those kinds of things, and trying to make sure that we were appropriately grateful for the sacrifices. I don't know that many people, if you're not in the military, have ever been to a forward operating base, but I went to forward operating bases and just talked to people and wanted to see what they were going through. And I have tremendous respect for the men and women in uniform as a result. I also did a lot of rural kind of stuff because I was on the House Agriculture Committee. That was my other love. And so helping Presidio and some border issues, highways, and those kinds of things. I mean, that to me was really important. The Dreamers and education, anything border related, I really liked.
For any of our audience considering a run for office, what do you think the biggest difference is between serving at the state level versus the federal level?
It was always a lot easier for me at the state level because I represented usually about 13 counties, but I could pick any Friday night football game in any one of those 13 counties. And especially after 22 years, I was going to know half the crowd. All right. Um, the congressional district was so much bigger in terms of the population and the media, the TV, the cost of running, and people didn't really know you. Plus, I was from Alpine, and the biggest population center of that district was San Antonio. So I think that made it harder. I mean, I was always, in the state legislature, you could have said something crazy about me, and Pete Gallego is actually from Mars, and he's not from this world, and he came on a spaceship, and people would have laughed and said, "Oh my gosh, we know that guy. He's not a nut. He's a reasonable, practical guy, and never loses his temper. He's exactly what we need, what we're looking for." But then when I got to Congress, if you had said, "Oh, that guy is a Martian, man. He came here on a spaceship, and he's the forward wave of all of these people from other planets that are it's an invasion," then people would have said, "Really? You think that's true?" It's just it was a completely different thing.
How exciting was it for you to go full circle to lead your alma mater?
I loved being president of St. Ross because I knew more about it really than any of the presidents than they'd ever had. I had essentially been keeping a list of things, um, from when I was a student, of things that I would change when I had the opportunity. And I had the opportunity, so I changed a lot of things. And I was pretty excited about the work and the progress. St. Ross had declining enrollment. Its relationship with the local communities wasn't good. Um, the budget, they had a bit of a deficit, and so I was able to work through all those kinds of things and put them back on a firm footing, and now their trajectory is great. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Can you share something specific that was on your list, like better pizza?
You know, I had some experiences. For me, um, one of the joys of being at a small university is that people should know you and treat you well. And so I changed some policies. We had policies, for example, I had a young man call me from San Antonio, and I'd actually block walked in his neighborhood. I'd been in his neighborhood. I knew where he lived. They were constituents of mine when I was in Congress. Didn't know the family, but I certainly knew the neighborhood. And I knew that his family wasn't wealthy and they didn't really have credit cards. And so he called me one day and he said, "Hey, I'm trying to register, but I can't uh, I can't register because the university says I owe money." And I I don't have a credit card and I can't like pay a bill, but so I'm trying to figure out how to do this. And I said, well, how much do you owe? And he said, 27 cents. And I said, wait, you're telling me that the university's position is that you can't enroll because you owe 27 cents? And, uh, and he said, yeah. And I said, no, come on, that can't be right. That can't be right. And so I walked down the hall, and I asked, hey, tell me about the student. And, and they said, well, he can't register because he owes money. And I said, well, how much money does he owe? And they said, 27 cents. So I said, okay, well, we're not going to do it that way anymore. If somebody doesn't owe, $500 or more, because he's going to get financial aid and he can pay his 27 cents when he registers. I mean, what's the deal? We were essentially making decisions that were theoretically, uh, they were meant to comply, but they weren't very commonsensical. And so those are the kinds of things I looked for rules that I just thought were crazy because they had them when I was there. And, um, I had a woman who called me because her son had not picked up his laundry in the laundry room. And so it had been there for 24 hours. And so they threw it in a dumpster. And it was a poor family, right? And so she said, who are you punishing? Because you're not punishing him. I'm the one that has to buy him the new clothes. So I said, well, really? We're doing that? And so we'll walk down the hall and make sure. So it is we made it a very student-centric campus, which I wanted when I was a student. I wanted people to be worried about me and my success and helping my trajectory. And so I think that's what we did for St. Ross. I mean, I'd had an experience at UT where, they, it was a big issue over my diploma because I won't have an Enya. My mother's maiden name was Peña, and I wanted the Peña on my diploma. And Pena in Spanish is very different from Peña, right? Because if you have a Pena, that's a regret, essentially, right? And my middle name wasn't Regret. So I asked them to make sure the Enya was on there, and the lady told me they didn't do those things for foreign students. And I said, well, I'm not a foreign student. I mean, I just finished, 3 years here and it was like a lot of effort and a lot of money. And the least you could do is spell my name correctly on the diploma. And so she took a black Sharpie's marker. She threw it across the counter at me and she said, if you want it on there that bad, then you can take this magic mark and you can put it on there yourself. So, I didn't leave UT with a lot of warm, fuzzy feelings when I left because of that. That was my last real interaction with them. And that's something that I was able to fix in the legislature. But I'd never wanted any St. Ross student to have an experience like that. And nowadays, I don't think they do.
Well, I also hope once you got to legislature and change things, UT does not have any student that experiences that anymore either.
I mean, for me, again, I grew up in a restaurant, right? My family owned a restaurant in Alpine for 80 years. It's all about customer service. Customer's always right. You go out of your way. Every single customer is important, and you're trying to provide a good experience, especially in today's environment where people are competing over college students. You need to treat people well. And I think that's one of the things that especially as an elected official, right? You learn about constituent services. You do constituent services. So I thought of them as constituents, and I think that that whole mindset now is very different at St. Ross than it was in years past.
What advice would you like to give to our audience who hopes to follow in your footsteps?
Well, I don't know that people would want to follow. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, and now that I look back, I mean, I think that I could have done things in different ways, so much better. But I will tell you the one key thing I think I would tell people is don't be afraid. Um, I really have learned that you know, then Governor Bush used to say, what Texans can dream, Texans can do. And I actually believe that. Um, I thought that was a great quote, a great theme. When I ran for the legislature, I was in my 20s, and people said, you're too young. Um, oh, by the way, you're the wrong color. You're too brown. Maybe you haven't noticed, but that's not exactly a winning quality around here. There were just all these reasons why everybody was telling me I couldn't do it. And I thought, you know what? I'm not gonna go uh uh and wonder whether I could have done it. I need to find out, right? I mean, Babe Ruth talked about don't never let the fear of striking out keep you from going to bat. So I jumped in, and the rest was history. I've been extremely, I feel like I've won the lottery several times. I rarely play the lottery because I feel like I've already won it. I had a wonderful, phenomenal career. I married an incredible woman, and I'm the father of just an amazing young son. So how many times can you win the lottery?
Well, thank you for all you do. You have served the state in many different capacities. Um, and as I'm sure that all of your constituents, whether from the university or from your congressional district or your state district or the legislature in general, everyone is here to say thank you.
Well, I appreciate that, and and like I said, it's been a joy. It's been a pleasure. I will tell you that you're also known by the enemies that you make, and I've made some. I wear those as a badge of honor as well. So but it's all about making the world a better place, and so I hope everybody goes out and tries to do that, not only for themselves, but for their kids or for their relatives or just for the world at large. There's a lot of things that we need to fix about the world we live in. Thank you for the invitation to be here.
Thank you for all you do. Thanks for being here. We'll see y'all next time.